The story begins with the fact that we are shown a burning village. There are also some wolf demons, of which there was a whole crowd. Immediately, they ran forward. They rushed straight at the girl in the center. This girl was very sad and she looked into the distance with empty eyes. She decided to act and used her powers, from which the wolves flew away. Immediately, the demon plopped down on the ground next to the guy, which surprised him. The girl decided to fly forward. She was already near the guy and he realized that she was immortal. She said that she would never have thought that such an ordinary village would ever be attacked by wolf demons. Look at the lifeless bodies of people. She added that she felt sorry for all these mortals. Then she looked down and was surprised. Immediately, the protagonist woke up and opened his eyes. He got up quickly and asked in shock if he was dead. Looking at the girl, he did not understand where he was. He saw a beautiful girl floating in front of him and recognized her. Her name is Hanan. He immediately rushed to her and took her hands and asked Hanan why she was here and if she had come to save him. The girl pulled away and asked how he knew her name and told him to let go of her hands because she didn't know him. The protagonist hugged her, which made her even more surprised. He said he knew she was angry, but he didn't want her to die because of him. Han had already started to get angry and the guy added that she should not worry. He would no longer act so recklessly. They would live a long and happy life together. She began to get even more angry and almost started to burn. And the protagonist asked why she was trembling. Han used her strength and pushed the guy away. While flying away, the protagonist asked her if she had decided to kill her own husband. Immediately, he slammed into the wall with all his might. The guy started running to the protagonist, whose name is Xiao Feng. He asked if he was okay. The guy asked Xiao Feng to answer him and apologized to the immortal as soon as possible. The protagonist was surprised by his words and did not understand where he was at all. That guy ran up to Hanan and begged her forgiveness. He believed that Xiao Feng had lost his mind due to the destruction of their Xiao village. He begged her to forgive him. Closing his eyes, he was surprised that this was Xiao village, but remembered that his village had been destroyed many years ago. Now he definitely does not understand anything. He assumed that he had moved into the past. The protagonist was walking forward and behind him was Hanan, who called her husband. Xiao Fei turned around and saw the beautiful Hanan, who was embarrassed. She hugged him and asked him to promise her that he would return safely. Han started crying and the protagonist put his hand on her face and said he promised he wouldn't leave her. After that, we are shown how the wounded protagonist was sitting on the floor with a weapon and someone said that even he, such a powerful master, fell today and laughed. Xiao Fei said that he had never obeyed others and would not continue to do so. The protagonist smiled and wiped the blood from his face. He shouted that he would die with him and there was a strong explosion. After that, they show us the heavenly temple. Immediately, the protagonist woke up in bed and shouted Hanyan's name. He was in a certain room, so he was surprised. The protagonist looked at his hands and realized that it was not a dream, and he really did not die. Immediately, a certain girl appeared, who noted that he had finally woken up. The girl called him to follow her, because the head of their palace is waiting for him. The protagonist got out of bed and asked the lady what kind of place it was. The girl turned around and, leaving, said that this was the sect of the Starry Inquirer of the Sky. She asked him to go. The head has been waiting for him for a long time. The protagonist ran after her and agreed. Xiao Fei, looking around, saw only girls. He's doing exactly as he thought. He found himself in the past. Just at this time, Liu Hanyan had to save him from the wolf demons, although she later became his wife. At the moment, she does not know him. Immediately, the door slammed loudly and the protagonist was scared and did not understand what was happening and why they slammed the door. Someone asked the protagonist if his name was Xiao Fei and he was surprised. It was the head of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer, Liu Hanyan, who was sitting on her throne. Hanyan, she is the most popular immortal cultivator in the Society of Immortals. We are shown how a fat guy approached Han and said that he had come here to ask for her hand in marriage. It's hard to even imagine how many men around the world managed to fall in love with her at first sight. But before the fat man could finish, Hanyan just froze him, which made all the guys just shocked. But in all these past years, only a few have been honored to know at least her name. This fat man fell to the floor and started crying, and the other guy tried to help him somehow. Hanyan approached the protagonist and asked how he knew her name. The protagonist turned to her and replied that he knew it would be hard to believe. Most likely, she will even think that he is an ordinary madman. However, he must say that he came from the future, and in this future, they were married. The girl got a little angry and said she would give him another chance to tell her the truth. The protagonist fell to his knees and realized that she would kill him, definitely kill him. She had only used that tone before when she was very angry with him. He stood up and assured the girl that he was telling her the truth. He said that her favorite fruit was a banana. The girl was already very angry. Then he told her that she was most afraid of snakes, and when she was still mortal, she was bitten by a dog. She clutched the throne in anger and it began to crack. The protagonist added that she was also named Hanan because of the prophecy of a fortune teller to whom her father went before her birth. The girl stood up and shouted at him to shut up, and Xiao Fei was surprised, handcuffed his neck and lifted him up. She dragged him away and noted that he had studied her life so thoroughly, and believed that he was a secret agent of some sect. She looked at him with furious eyes and asked who sent him. The protagonist assured that what he said was true. She was born with a predisposition to frost. Therefore, she cultivates the technique of the icy heart, and not the technique of the 9 scrolls of the Starry Sky Inquirer. Han Yan was surprised by his words, because she understood that only her master knew about it. She didn't understand. How could he find out about it, and thought that her master had told her about it? She said she didn't think he could find out that much. Now she definitely has no choice but to kill him. It was a pity, because she thought she could get some information out of him first. The girl held out her fingers. The protagonist was very surprised and made a face. At one point, he managed to tell her that she had a red birthmark in the form of a drop on the base of her thigh. Immediately, Han stopped her fingers right next to the protagonist's face, and he was just scared looking at them. There was an awkward silence and the protagonist fell to the floor. The protagonist laughed and tried to clear his throat and said, "She doesn't think that such a thing can be known to an undercover agent." Xiao Fei came to his senses and opened his eyes. He saw Han Yan in front of him, who was very confused and asked what else he knew about her. The protagonist stood up and wiped himself, saying that he also knows that she has an ice lotus mark on her right breast. It appeared due to the cultivation of the icy heart technique. Her master made her start cultivating this technique. It is somewhat similar to making a pill. After all, as soon as she loses her virginity, all her power will go to her partner. Fortunately, she found out about her master's intentions, so she secretly killed him and made everything so that everyone would think it was an accident. No one ever found out about it. That's how she became the current head of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect. His wife, Liu Hanyan, did all this. She was just shocked by this information and her legs gave way and she fell to the floor. The girl was embarrassed and blushed while awkwardly silent. She put her hand on her chest and said that only she could tell about it. Otherwise, no one would ever have been able to find out about it. She added that he said he came from the future. Han asked in the future what happened to them. The protagonist understood everything and exhaled. He said that the future that awaits them is a time of great chaos, which has not been seen for more than 1,000 years. In 50 years, a ruthless war will break out between the forces of good and evil. The whole of Shenzhou will be engulfed in flames. 4 temples of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect were destroyed. The Red Sky sect rebelled against the demonic sect. Only a name remained of the Loshu sect, and 2 of the strongest masters of the Wuxian sect were killed. The sect of the Starry Sky Interrogator betrayed him and accused him of murdering his own master. He had to run away, but later he met her, and they subsequently became a Taoist couple. They decided not to go out and just live the life of a happy couple. However, this was not to be. They were attacked and Han shouted for Xiao Feng to run away. And there was a strong explosion. The protagonist put his hand on her hands and said that then he took with him the one who dared to disturb their peaceful life. He thought he would never see her again, and he can't believe that when he opened his eyes after that battle, he found himself in the moment when she saved him. He buried his face in her hands, which made the girl even more embarrassed and blushed. The protagonist was happy and he said he was so glad to meet her again. He considered that this was a real gift from heaven. From his words, the girl blushed deeply and did not know what to say. After that, the maids did not understand why the protagonist was still there. After all, the ceremony will begin soon. The girl can't even imagine what the mistress wants from him. Another replied that Han just wanted to ask him about something and assured her that she shouldn't worry about it. She knows how the mistress treats men. Besides, this guy is an ordinary mortal. At this time, the protagonist was writing something on paper and Han was next to him. She asked if this was the improved technique he was talking about. The protagonist agreed. This is an improved technique of the icy heart. It took them 3 years to perfect her technique. The girl bent down and realized that it was true. Such meridians can only be found in those who practice the icy heart. It's different for ordinary cultivators. The protagonist realized that she was really a genius, since she could understand everything just by looking at it. This technique was created especially for her. The girl blushed a little and got angry. And the protagonist added that this technique is not only more powerful, but also does not have the side effect that her master wanted to achieve. If he starts cultivating this technique, she won't lose her powers even if he marries her. The girl was even more confused and cried out asking what he was talking about, even if he really is from the future, who said that his, Liu Hanyan and she, are the same person. The girl smiled and turned around and added that it was possible that he did not come from the future, but from another world. Then it turns out that she is a completely different person. The protagonist looked at her and noted that she even thought about other worlds. And her knowledge and the truth are impressive. The protagonist put down the brush and noted that she was right. Perhaps she was not the girl he had once fallen in love with. The girl was immediately surprised and looked at the protagonist. Xiao Fei lay down on the bed and noted that he had perfected this technique only for his wife, so he could not allow it to fall into the hands of someone else, and Han was surprised by his words. The girl got angry and puffed out her cheeks. The protagonist asked what it was. Does she want to take away from him by force the proof of his love for his wife? She was angry and turned around and replied that she did not need a technique and she could handle it herself. The protagonist held out the canvas and smiled and said that he was just joking. There's nothing wrong with giving her this technique. The girl was surprised and turned around. Xiao said that he would give her this technique, and in return she would accept him as her true disciples. The girl shouted that it was impossible. There were only women in their yard of a floating snowflake and did not understand how she could accept it. The protagonist realized that she was refusing. He stretched out and said that he was fine. Then he stood up and added that then he would leave her, and the girl held on to her heart. Xiao said that from now on, nothing would connect them anymore, and the girl was simply shocked by his words. Then she bit her lips and asked him to stop. The protagonist stopped and looked back. Then he smiled, because he knew his plan would work. Han Yan agreed to take him on as an apprentice. However, he must not break the rules of their palace, otherwise she would not spare him. And another thing that made her blush a lot. Turning away, she added that he should not tell anyone that Xiao came from the future and that they were married there. The protagonist smiled and said that they had an agreement. The girl, a little embarrassed, asked what he was going to do. Xiao Fei took a brush and ran and said that he would immediately go write down his knowledge of the techniques. After that, they show us the mountains and beautiful temples. There were people standing on the bridge and they were surprised when they saw so many cultivators gathered there. Han Yan stood at the top and told everyone that they were now in the territory of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect. There were students standing below, and the head added that they had all been chosen as disciples of their sect. But before they join their ranks, they will have to pass a test of the spirit, so that they can determine the level of their spiritual root. Depending on the results, they will be assigned to the appropriate palace of their sect. Everything will depend only on their luck. Everyone was surprised and whispering. After that, I show us the protagonist's friend, who was looking for Xiao Feng and did not understand where he was. The protagonist himself immediately appeared, who put his hand on a friend's shoulder and asked if he was looking for someone. The guy got angry and asked where he had been. He hadn't seen him since the immortal had brought them here. The protagonist replied that he was just talking to her. She apologized and said she was sorry for what she had done. His friend whispered that he had asked around and understood something. Everyone here except the two of them are immortal disciples. They all already have a fairly high level of cultivation. If they had bad spiritual roots, he understood that they would simply be kicked out of here. The protagonist patted his friend on the shoulder and asked him not to be so afraid. Then he hugged him to himself and added that not only talent is important in cultivation, but also luck, so maybe they'll be lucky. The guy was delighted and noted that Xiao was right. He just continued to believe in the best. The protagonist smiled and said that he had every chance. After that, Xiao thought about it and remembered how his friend tested his strength. At that time, he could not have imagined that then he would be the most talented candidate for the apprentice. He was much more gifted than him. However, this time he had prepared for the test in advance. The protagonist grabbed his friend by the hand and dragged him along, saying that they needed to go and pass this test as soon as possible. After that, we are shown the Tajidian Hall of the Highest Principal, one of the 6 western palaces of the Forbidden City, which used to be the residences of imperial concubines. The palace is located to the west of the Eternal Longevity Palace, to the north of the Eternal Spring Palace, and to the south of the Mind Improvement Hall. A friend told the protagonist to take a look, because there are only cultivators around. Then they saw some special places where people were standing and asked who the chairs were prepared for. The protagonist said that, of course, these are places for the heads of the 9 palaces of the sect of the Starry Inquirer of the Sky, and he can see for himself. Immediately, all the students began to greet the senior masters. A friend told Feng to bow his head. You can't show disrespect like that. The protagonist understood him and did it. At the same time, he looked directly at Han Yan. Guangling Zhenren welcomed all of them to the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer. He also introduced himself and said that he was the lord of the sect of the Star Inquirer of the Sky. All of them are some of the most talented people in their world. Naturally, they already meet the entrance requirements of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect. But before they can enter their sect, they need to pass the spirit test, so that each of their palaces can choose their own disciples. Nevertheless, they unanimously agreed with him. The protagonist hugged his friend and asked him not to be afraid, because everything will be fine. After that, it was announced that the test of the spirit was beginning. Everyone was just shocked and turned around, and there was a strong flash in front. This stone will be able to measure the level of the spiritual root of all people. After they pass the spirit test, they will be assigned one of the ranks, A, B, C, and D. Those who are called by the judge will have to go to the stone and put their hands on it. The first one was named Cheng Nu, and the fat guy said he was here. The judge told him to put his hands on the stone, and he ran past him and agreed. He raised his hands and pressed them against the stone. The judge said that he has the spiritual root of the tree, the average B rank, and it's cool. The next Zhangling Hang, and the guy raised his hand and said that he was also here. The protagonist was looking straight ahead, and Han Yan didn't know what kind of spiritual root this guy had. But if he has at least a B rank, then she will find a reason to take him in. Immediately, Guangling Zhenren turned to Han Yan. He asked her if she had already noticed any student. The girl was surprised and replied that not yet. The judge said that Chang has a rank. Yi Zhengxi, the spiritual root of the tree, is a rank. The judge congratulated him, but he was surprised and did not believe it. The head of Guangling laughed and thought it was good. He did not expect that there would be such a gifted student among them. He then turned to Gong Han and said that he had heard that this disciple was one of the two she had recently brought to the sect. He was wondering what the second one would be like. The next one was announced, and it was Xiao Feng and Han Yan who became interested in him. The protagonist laughed and said that he did not think that he would ever have to go through this again. Sui Fei walked up to the stone and put his hand on it. After that, he was informed that he had a D rank, and the protagonist was not upset because he thought so. The judge was shocked when he saw that the protagonist had a D rank. He was just in shock and did not believe what he saw on the screen. The other guys started to get indignant because they were told that the best of the best were here. Where could such a weakling come from here? Another guy pointed out that a D-rank cultivator is not too different from ordinary mortals. He had heard that such cultivators could become servants at most. The judge asked if he wanted to try again. He assumed that the measuring stone was wrong about something. The protagonist replied that he himself knows how untalented he is. The judge panicked a little and was surprised. Xiao approached a friend and called him a genius and asked how he felt, because he was cooler than him. The friend apologized to Xiao because he didn't know. Xiao came up to him and put his hand on his shoulder and asked him not to worry about it. He just had to appreciate his gift and work even harder. Besides, isn't he the kind of guy who needs some kind of talent? A friend noted that he was speaking correctly. The protagonist turned around and did not understand why it seemed to him that someone was glaring at him. Xiao laughed and realized that this made Han Yan very angry. The girl was surprised and did not understand how he could be so bad. The head of the Infinity Palace, Su Kaian, was angry and did not understand who he was. Who did he pay to be let in here? It's okay to take money, but you can't be so arrogant. Han Yan replied that she had brought this man and asked if he had any problems with it. Su Kaian was surprised and said that even she shouldn't have brought a person with such a low rank and asked if she hadn't checked him before bringing him here. The girl turned and squirmed and said that she had completely forgotten about it. He got even more angry because of her words and asked how one could forget such a thing and noted that she constantly forgets about some important things. The master of the Alchemy Palace, Bai Zhenren, laughed and noted that Brother Su looked so worried. The master of the Yin and Yang Palace, Gong Weidao, noted that it was he who needed to worry and not others. Each palace chooses its students according to the rating of the true Battle of the Heads, which took place several years ago, and the Infinity Palace then took the last place. In other words, if other palaces do not want to take the protagonist to themselves, then Master Su will have to do it, and we are shown how the protagonist approached everyone and got acquainted. He approached the girl and said that he was glad to meet her, because from now on they would become one family, and the girl was shocked. After the judge turned to the master, he said that all 78 students had completed the spirit test. Guangling Zhenren said that according to the rating of the true Battle of the Heads, the Yin and Yang Palace would be the first to choose his disciples. He asked Master Gong Weidao to act. The elder turned to another old man, whose name is Ming Hai, to go, because he knows what choice to make, and he agreed. He immediately jumped hard and flew. Guangling Zhenren noted that now it was his turn and he trusted Chuan with the choice and he agreed. Then he said that the floating snowflake palace would make his choice next. The choice is hers, Gong Han. The girl told Mingxia that everything was as before and she understood her mistress. The protagonist turned back. He realized that Mingxia was coming and got ready. Mingxia was walking straight at him and the protagonist was standing in front of everyone. Immediately, she walked past him and he just closed his eyes. Mingxia told the girl that she would go with her and she was delighted. And the protagonist was surprised. He was confused and didn't know what to think. Then a guy was told to get out of the crowd and he ran forward joyfully. After that, Lu Ren was called to him and he agreed. Then the couple Jiang Wen and Dong Xin were called and they were delighted. As a result, it turned out that everyone had already chosen and there was only one protagonist left on the square. Xiao thought about it and realized that everything was exactly the same as in his previous life. He hoped she hadn't changed her mind and immediately thought that she wouldn't do that. Guangling Zhenren told Su that it was his turn, but there was only one student left, so he wouldn't have to choose. Su was angry and said that he did not want to take him in and felt that they had done it on purpose. Hanan stood up and told Su that if he didn't need him, then she could take him in. Since she was the one who brought him here, then she should be responsible for him. She will fulfill her duty as the head of their sect's palace. Guangling Zhenren was surprised and asked if she wanted to accept this young man into her palace, but only girls study there. Han Yan replied that their sect is one of the pillars of the righteousness of this world. The sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer must promote its beliefs not only through martial arts, but also through the faith of people. There is nothing wrong with the fact that this disciple has a low rank of spiritual root. There are plenty of examples in the world when people with such spiritual roots achieved some success in martial arts. A boy or a girl, it doesn't matter. They are all just students to her, so she can take him to her palace. However, if they expel a disciple whom they brought into the sect themselves, then the trust of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer will be undermined. After that, they will no longer be able to be called a righteous sect. Gong Weidao thought this was a decent answer. That's what a true master of their sect should be like. Bai Zhenren said that unlike some, Gong Han showed real righteousness. Exactly, and this is despite the fact that for many years she accepted only girls. Decent, respect. Guangling added that, on the contrary, the Infinity Palace had fallen in his eyes. Now it is clear why they are getting weaker and weaker every year. These words made Su very angry. After a moment, he shouted loudly for everyone to stop talking, which even the audience was surprised by. He stood up and pointed his finger at the protagonist and said that he was also the master of the palace of the sect of the Starry Inquirer of the Sky and he did not need help in teaching his students. Even if this guy's spiritual root is not that good, he will take him in. He will accept and make him a worthy disciple of their sect. Guangling was surprised and did not understand what was going on here at all. Han Yan was surprised and asked Su to wait, because she was the one who brought Xiao Feng, so she must bear responsibility. Su replied that she had already recruited students to her soaring snowflake palace. The girl agreed, but wanted to add something. Su interrupted and said that although his Infinity Palace is the weakest palace of all, however, he is still the master of one of the palaces of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer. Even if there is only one candidate left among all the applicants, it is now his turn to choose students for the Infinity Palace. He shouted that Xiao Fei was a disciple of the Infinity Palace from now on. Bai Zhenren understood him and did not understand why he shouted like that. Guangling laughed and noted that today the heavens themselves had blessed their sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer and he was very happy. Han Yan did not expect this in any way. She didn't want the protagonist to blame her for this. She did everything she could. The protagonist was surprised and did not understand what the hell they were doing here. After that, they show us the Infinity Palace. Someone said that Junior Xiao. This is the main mountain peak of their Infinity Palace. The temple of their master is a little further away. It was Xiang Fian, the senior disciple of the Infinity Palace. He asked the protagonist not to worry. He would not allow anyone to mock him. Now he is part of their palace. He slapped him on the shoulder and the protagonist became very hurt and screamed. Fian was surprised and apologized to him. He had forgotten that his body was so fragile. He will have better control over his strength next time. He thought he had accidentally dislocated his shoulder. He wanted to put it back in place. The protagonist asked him to stop. He'd better hurry to the palace. He agreed. The protagonist laughed and noted that Sang remained the same as he remembers him. He always didn't understand how strong he was. In his previous life, he also got into the Infinity Palace. However, at that time he was just an errand boy. It took him 20 years to finally become a full-fledged disciple of the palace, although he is still not sure if he became a full-fledged student then or not. At that time, it was Brother Zhang who taught him martial arts, and, to be honest, he suffered a lot from it. This time, thanks to his wife's blessing, he was still able to become a full-fledged disciple of the Infinity Palace. It turned out very well. Su Mai-oking, Su Kaiane's daughter, appeared immediately. She was surprised and asked if he had really brought the youngest to them and asked when he would come. Su replied that he just got too excited and blurted out without thinking. Mai-oking boiled over a bit and said that he couldn't give it up. He took him in and shouted about it in front of such a crowd. She thinks that taking this student in was the right decision. Lin Xian, Su Kaiane's wife, asked, didn't Su himself say that despite his meager spiritual root, this one has a mature mind? She asked him not to worry, because she would help him with his training. Su noticed that his wife was right. Afterward, Mr. and Mrs. were told that Xiao Feng had arrived and Su allowed him to enter. Zhang asked Xiao to just do as he told him. The protagonist thanked Zhang. Immediately, the protagonist opened the door and found 3 dark figures in front of him. The protagonist crossed his arms and said that disciple Xiao Feng greets master, mistress, and elder sister. After that, We are told that the disciples in the sect of the Star Inquirer of Heaven are divided into servant disciples, second-generation disciples, and true disciples. Servant disciples are not allowed to receive the true knowledge of the sect and cultivate. They can only become official disciples of the sect after many years of hard work for the benefit of the palace. But the students of the second generation can already be called official students, although they do not have the opportunity to study the true or more complex secret techniques of the sect. They can cultivate quite well, which, in the end, will allow them to achieve good success. Only a few become true disciples. They study the best techniques of the sect, as they are trained from the very beginning to become the mainstay of this sect in the future. The protagonist was surprised and felt that he could not even imagine that because of her intervention, he would suddenly become a true disciple of the Infinity Palace. He even has his own yard now, and he doesn't even know what she was doing at that time. However, even with the experience of his past life, his development is still too slow. We need to come up with some other way. Immediately, someone started knocking on the protagonist's door. Xiao Feng was surprised and asked who it was who came to him at such an hour. He got up and went to the door and shouted that he was already coming. He opened the doors and saw a huge snow-white beast in front of him. The protagonist wasn't even scared and asked Su Kaini how he could be useful. The girl went downstairs and asked why he didn't react to it in any way. Others were scared to death at the sight of Sai. He smiled and replied that he understood her and asked her to wait a second while closing the door. A moment later, the protagonist opened the door and shouted that there was a huge lion standing near his house. Even the beast felt awkward. Xiao Feng asked if he reacted normally. The girl thought about it and replied that it would be fine. Immediately, she began to turn her head and shouted that no, and he should forget about it, because she was visiting him on another matter. Xiao was surprised and asked for what reason. After that, the protagonist and Su Kaini were sitting on the floor and Zhang Fian asked Kaini why she had brought Feng here. He doesn't think he will keep up with the pace of her learning. The girl asked him not to worry about it. It would be better if they study together, and she as his older sister will teach him everything he does not know yet. The protagonist agreed with her and assured her that everything would be fine. Su Kaini thought and laughed. She used to be the youngest among the true disciples, so the elders always forced her to study with them. However, from this day on, everything will change. Finally, there was someone who was not only younger, but also much weaker than her. She apologized, but she needed Xiao Feng to take the hit. After Zhang Fiani said that then today he would talk about the simplest things. Even if he is not gifted with talent, he must believe that hard work always compensates for mediocrity. The protagonist agreed with him. Zhang Fian added that in that case, he should start by saying that their cultivation is divided into 9 stages, namely, the stage of Kai cultivation, the stage of laying the foundations, the stage of core formation, the stage of the immortal infant, the stage of soul separation, the stage of fusion, the stage of separation of emptiness, the stage of Mahayana, and the stage of 9 disasters. The members of their sect cultivate based on the 9-scroll method of the Starry Sky Inquirer. Each of the scrolls of this method corresponds to a certain stage of cultivation. Su Kaini began to yawn and said that since she already knew everything, she could rest for a while. She decided to get some sleep. Anyway, the youngest is not very talented. He will have to spend a lot of time to understand all this. After a moment, Zhang Fan shouted for Su to wake up and she was surprised when she woke up. The man said it was time to check how hard she had been practicing with the sword yesterday. The girl was surprised and asked if she didn't need to fill in the gaps in their youngest's knowledge. She thinks that he has not yet fully understood everything that Zhang explained today. Zhang pointed his finger at the protagonist and said that Xiao Feng had already filled in all the blanks and even learned today's lesson. The girl was even more surprised and asked how long she had been sleeping. Zhang replied that it would not be long, only half an hour. Although the heavens have deprived Junior Feng of talent, he has an extremely high level of understanding. He grasped everything he told him on the fly. He did not expect that the protagonist would be able to understand and remember everything the first time. The girl asked how this was possible. She didn't understand why this guy was so good at studying. She thought he might have just pretended to be ordinary, but in fact turned out to be a real genius, or she was so bad. No, if everything continues like this, then he will soon join the other elders and start teaching her with them. She can't just lose the big sister status she's been waiting for. The protagonist approached Su Kaini and asked her if something was wrong, and she drooped a little. Immediately, she stood up and told them to go to the second brother. He would teach them the techniques of formations and talismans. He was very surprised and did not know what to answer. Immediately, the girl called Xiaobai and ran to him, and the protagonist ran after her and asked her to wait a second. Xiang felt that the younger one was a little offended by this. Well, it's not even bad for her, because she will be motivated to get stronger. After that, we are told that the so-called talismans and formations inherently have the same basis. They allow spiritual energy to act in a special way, which is why their results are much superior than the results of using spiritual energy directly. The master said that today they will study one of the most basic formations, Kaiyangua, which means the very sky. This formation reminds them, the Taoists, that the path of heaven is never interrupted. It goes on from day to day, from week to week, and so on, and they, the Taoists, have to imitate the heavenly way. Su Kaiyani was very bored and slapped herself in the face. Because she understood that she could not sleep, she had to maintain the status of an older sister. The master noticed that it seemed to him that Myoking was full of enthusiasm today. But Xiao Feng had some doubts in his eyes. The girl smiled and replied that it was quite natural, because no one can immediately realize such deep thoughts. Immediately, the protagonist stood up and the girl added that if he had any questions, he could contact her. Xiao Feng said that he really had doubts, and he would like to discuss them with the master. He was surprised and agreed. The protagonist noticed that he said that the Kaiyangua formation reminded them of the continuous and uninterrupted path of heaven. He agrees with this, but it seems to him that the Kaiyangua formation has another meaning. He asked if he did not think that such a continuous path could also indicate detachment from the rest of the world. Immediately, the old man shouted loudly at the whole temple. He walked up to the protagonist and patted him on the shoulder, laughed and said that he did not think that he, Xiao Feng, would turn out to be a real genius of formations at such a young age. He is absolutely right. The formation has another, more hidden meaning. However, he thought it would be too early to tell him about it. Then they went where and the old man told Myoking that from now on, if she had any questions about the formations, she could safely contact her older brother Feng, which she was just shocked and petrified on the spot. After leaving the temple, Su asked Xiao how he even understood what this old man was talking about. The protagonist replied that there was a moment in which he doubted, so he decided to ask the master. In fact, he understood that, after all, this was the second time he was going through this. Learning the basics is completely useless for him. If he continued to pretend to be an ordinary idiot, then his development would stop altogether, and he needs to become stronger as soon as possible. She didn't understand how he got around her at all. The younger one must have the knowledge of the younger one. She couldn't be the youngest for him, either. There was only one way left and she called him to go further. After that, they went to the library and Su said that they were going to the fourth elder sister, who is in charge of practical classes. The protagonist was surprised by her words and she added that it was not worth worrying about. The fourth sister is very gentle and reads books most of the time. She is a very kind woman. Su Myoking laughed, because she thought that now she would be able to regain her senior status. After all, this is not some kind of knowledge or enlightenment, but real cultivation. The fourth disciple of the Infinity Palace, Ju Yaoshan, apologized because she is busy. Su Myoking said that the only problem is that she is gradually losing touch with the outside world. The protagonist bowed to her and said that then they would not bother the fourth sister. The protagonist thought it wasn't even funny. Right now, he is an ordinary mortal who has not even managed to step into the stage of Kai cultivation yet, and she wanted him to fight the fourth elder sister, who is in the immortal infant stage. He would have definitely piled up. The protagonist started to leave and Su ran after him, saying where did he go? Immediately, she tripped over a standing foot, and thus fell on the protagonist, and he hit the closet with his back. Immediately everything collapsed and the cabinet broke and flew away. Lying on top of him, Su asked if he was okay and the protagonist replied that he was fine. Immediately, an ominous shadow appeared above them, which made them very scared. Ju Yaoshan got very angry and literally flared up. She asked them because they wanted practical classes. Su turned around and was very scared and replied that since she was already busy, they would not insist. The protagonist replied that they would probably already go and would not distract her. Immediately, the door slammed shut. The girl was just furious and said that everything was fine and there was no need to worry. After all, their older sister is not some kind of demon. After that, evening came and they show us the palace of the floating snowflake. Han Yan was taking a bath and was informed that she had a meeting with Master Bai Yun soon. The head told the girl to tell her that the meeting was cancelled and she still had things to do, and she agreed. The girl lay down in her water and wondered how the guy in the Infinity Palace was doing.